Thank you for joining me to learn more about speaking to autistic children. I assume that you're watching today because you are a parent, carer, or teacher of an autistic young person. But everything I say here is applicable to all children, whether they are neurodivergent or not. I'm Jenny Sandler, and I am a specialist autism, ADHD, and dyslexia teacher and consultant, which means that I work one-on-one with dyslexic, autistic, and ADHD young people to help them with their academic learning and executive function skills. I also consult with parents and schools on how to make adaptations and accommodations to the home and school environments, along with providing support with cognition and learning. I have been doing this for over 13 years, and in addition to my teaching qualification, I have a master's degree in dyslexia and a master's of education in autism in children. I have had many years of adapting my speech to communicate with children, with autistic children, in both my professional life as a teacher and also in my personal life as a parent, as my son is autistic. And I am not too proud to admit that I'm probably better at communicating with my students than my own children, because parenting is emotional and it's really hard. So listen to what I have to say and take on board whatever feels relevant and whatever resonates with you. But please don't feel pressured to do everything I suggest. It is hard to change the way we speak, and even small changes and adaptations are beneficial. As I'm sure you know, the autism spectrum is broad and every individual experiences being autistic in a unique manner. My speaking and communicating tips are general, and you may need to adapt them to suit the requirements of the autistic young person in your family or setting. I'd like to start with eye contact. We are obsessed with telling children to make eye contact with us, especially autistic children. It's not necessary. Think about a time when you've been sitting in a meeting and someone is speaking. Are they always making eye contact? I bet more often than not, they are looking at the ceiling, possibly with their eyes closed, while they try to articulate their thoughts. Think about all the conversations you've had while out walking or sitting in a car. Are you gazing into your friend's eyes? Unlikely. For some autistic people, making eye contact is uncomfortable. You do not need to ask your child to look you in the eye or look at you at all. I do sometimes request that the person I'm speaking to direct their voice, which kind of means their face, in my direction, but that is so I can hear them and not because I need them to look at me. Okay, but how do I know if my child or pupil is listening or paying attention? It's our job as parents and teachers to learn and understand how that child presents when they are paying attention versus when they are distracted. It's also reasonable to ask the child what listening looks like for them, so that you can recognize when they are paying attention. If I want to speak to my son when he's on his computer, I say his name and the word pause. So Jack, pause. He's not actually called Jack, by the way. Once he's paused, then I know I can speak, even if he's still looking at the screen. If I start talking and he's not paused, then I'm talking to myself. You can also ask them to repeat back what you've said so that you know they've heard and understood you. Even better if you tell them in advance that you want them to repeat the instructions back. Jack, pause, listen to the instructions. I will ask you to repeat them. Please get ready for swimming now. I will come and get you when it's time to go. What did I just ask you? And the response will be something along the lines of, yeah, 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 I'm going to get changed now. See you soon. I'm going to talk more later on about giving instructions because as parents and teachers, we do spend a lot of time telling others what to do. Firstly, though, I want to mention the importance of slowing down and allowing for processing time. Did you notice the speed at which I gave Jack those instructions about getting ready for swimming? It was too fast. It is common for autistic people to need a little longer to process or make sense of what we're saying. A good suggestion is to wait 10 seconds for someone to respond or before you say something else. But the person you are speaking with may need more or less time. And I remember when I started working with children over Zoom in lockdown a few years ago, and I was working with this little boy, and his mom was in the room with him. And I would ask him a question. We were reading. I'd ask him a question about, the comprehension of the text, or even just to read a word. Sometimes he needed to pause to think. And I'd be waiting, and I'd be in my head counting 1,000, 1,000. And his mom was always saying, come on, like you can do it. You know this. And I know what it's like because she's thinking, oh my gosh, why is he sitting here not saying anything? And his teacher's here, and she's just waiting. And I said to her after a couple of sessions, I said, it's okay, I'm waiting. I said, it's really hard for me too. I'm counting in my head, but trust me, he'll get it. He doesn't need to be prompted. He can do it. He just needs a little bit longer to think. And that's always stuck with me, how I would sit there counting, but feeling awkward because I was thinking that the parent is wondering what's going on. Why isn't she helping him? What am I paying this lady for? She's just sitting there. But it's what he needed. It is also helpful to slow down speech in general, which can be hard when we are rushed or have a lot to say. Slowing down will help you enunciate. It's easier to understand what are you doing than what you doing. I try to summon my phone voice. The voice when you always sound a bit sort of posher than you really are. And that's when I naturally manage to speak slowly and clearly. It may feel a bit contrived at first, but it's worth it though, because the person you were speaking to will likely hear you the first time around if you speak slowly and clearly with pauses in between instructions or thoughts, or when you're waiting for someone to answer a question. And of course, you'll find your rhythm and pace that works best in your setting. Another advantage of slowing your speech and pausing between sentences or ideas is that it gives you, the speaker, more time to choose your words carefully. We clutter our speech with a lot of unnecessary words. As a teenager growing up in California, my British parents despaired of my constant use of like. But it was clearly a losing battle because like seems here to stay, and my parents even say it without like noticing. Anyway, that's another unnecessary word. Anyway, like, you know what I mean? Literally, basically, actually, totally, to be fair, as it were. We stick these words in without realizing that they are unnecessary. They detract from what we are trying to say and are distracting to the listener. Slowing down, summoning our phone voices, and thinking about whether or not you would use those words in writing will help declutter your speech. The same applies to asking questions. We tend to ask questions in roundabout ways. Do you mind if I sit here? Or is this seat taken? You haven't seen Jill anywhere, have you? I don't suppose you want a biscuit, do you? Slowing down allows us to think of more concise ways of phrasing our questions, such as, can I sit in this chair? Do you know where Jill is? Or Even better, where is Jill? Do you want a biscuit? Pausing and slowing down also gives us the chance to ensure we are asking or saying what we mean. This is critical because autistic children tend to be very literal. A typical scenario in my house is, "Hey, Jack, can you shut your computer down now?" He's going to say, or he'll say, "No," because I've asked him, and he'll interpret that as a choice, and it's not something he would choose. Then I say, "Let me rephrase that. Jack, shut down your computer now." And then he will shut it down. Of course, he knows what I'm asking all along, but as he doesn't want to get off the computer, he makes me work for it. It's best to be specific. We often say things like, "How was your day?" or "How was school?" And the person we're speaking to doesn't know how to respond because maybe there's so much to say, and they may think that we're expecting a step-by-step account of their day, or they may feel too overwhelmed to respond adequately. So try to ask very specific questions such as, "How was your maths lesson? What did you eat for lunch? Did anything interesting or unusual happen at school?" This actually happened this week with one of my after school students. We sat down to get started and I said, "How was your day?" And she said, "Good," like the typical 8-year-old that she is. And then I asked, "Did anything interesting or unusual happen at school today?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. We went on a school trip to see the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium." She then told me all about how they went down to the pitch, but not onto the pitch. They went inside the changing rooms, saw all the shirts on the wall, and that the backdrop that the player stands in front of for post-match interviews is much smaller in real life than it is on TV. I got all of that fabulous information by asking if anything interesting or unusual had happened at school today. Figurative language, expressions, and idioms can be really confusing, but they are part of our language and culture, and it is unreasonable never to use them. I'd also be very careful about how you use sarcasm with children in general. Again, your choice of language needs to be refined depending on who you are speaking to. It is helpful to be aware of figurative phrases you regularly use, so then you can either explain them or not use them when speaking to an autistic child. I like explaining them to both autistic and non-autistic children because I think it is useful and helpful to learn and understand new vocabulary and expressions, but I am mindful of who I'm talking to and their age and stage. As parents, we were always saying things like, "I'll be there in a second. Can you give me a minute? Just a moment." You get the idea. And this can be confusing to all children, but particularly autistic ones. When my son was maybe 3 or 4, before I knew he was autistic, he noticed that I was essentially lying to him when I said things like, "Just a second," because I always took longer. So I explained that we have many different ways of saying soon, and that I don't usually mean an actual second or 60 seconds. Then the next time I said, "We're leaving in a minute," he asked, "Do you mean soon or in 60 seconds?" And then it was just so lovely because he wanted clarification. It really made me think about my word choices. But my favorite part of this story is when I asked him to do something and he said, "Okay, I'll do that in the expression just a minute." So he was letting me know that he was using an expression and that he would do whatever it was I'd asked him to do and do it soon and not exactly in 1 minute's time. I know my son extremely well, so I have an idea of what language I can use around him, and he feels comfortable asking me to explain anything he doesn't understand. But I tend to be more selective with my word choice when I'm speaking to the autistic children that I work with. Back to giving instructions. Say the person's name to get their attention so they know you are talking to them and not to someone else. And check they are receptive and listening before starting your request or your instructions. If you are talking to a group, such as a class, then make sure beforehand that the autistic child in that group knows that when you say class or guys, that it includes them as well. Children generally respond better to positive instead of negative commands. Jill, hold the ball when you walk through the school, as opposed to Jill, stop bouncing that ball indoors. Consider using visuals instead of speaking, especially when things are noisy. Keep the instructions short and to the point, and pause after each one. The age and stage of the child you're speaking to will determine how many instructions you can give at a time. And check that they've understood. If necessary, repeat the instructions using the same phrase as before. Here's an example. I'm going to speak slowly and take pauses. I'm not going to pause for 10 seconds, though, for the purpose of moving on with this presentation. Jack, please do something for me now. Go to your laundry basket. Take out all the dark clothes and bring them to the laundry room. If you aren't sure if something is dark or light, then show it to me. Please tell me what I just said so I know you heard me. And if Jack responds with show you the darks and lights, or doesn't respond at all, or says he has no idea what I'm talking about because I'm boring, then I will say, Jack, I'm saying it again. Go to your laundry basket. Take out all the dark clothes and bring them to the laundry room. If you aren't sure if something is dark or light, then show it to me. Please tell me what I just said so I know you heard me. We've got to be nuanced with this because so much depends on who you're talking to and what state they're in at the time. Someone tired or worried may need more repetitions or fewer steps. The way I just spoke when asking Jack to bring the laundry felt incredibly contrived to me because I don't usually need to speak to him that slowly. However, if he was dysregulated, then I probably would speak like that, but I would be unlikely to be asking him to do laundry if he was so dysregulated, or even unlikely to, request anything of him at that time or give him instructions. So it's very dependent on the situation that you're in and the person that you're with. If you're in a busy classroom, then fewer steps may be more suitable, and it may not be necessary to ask them to repeat the instructions. You know your child, so you need to do what's best for that situation. A child very focused on an activity may need warnings or a timer to let them know that you are coming over to give them an instruction. They may need a transitional activity to stop what it is they are doing so they can listen to you. A transitional activity is something the child does to create space from what they were just doing, and also to give them a signal that something else is starting. Picture a classroom. The children are at their seats working on something independently. The teacher might tell the class that it's time to tidy up and put away their books and come and sit on the carpet. The transitional activity in this case is the tidying up and moving to sit on the carpet. Then the class should be ready to listen to the teacher's instructions because the act of tidying up has separated them from their work, and the act of moving to the carpet tells them that the teacher is going to say something. I want to emphasize that thinking about speech and how we communicate with autistic children is really important. Aside from the obvious, which is that we want them to understand what we are saying, we also want to be supportive and calming people to talk to. Many autistic children experience a lot of overwhelm and overload throughout the day due to the environment that we operate in. And this may lead to anxiety, frustration, exhaustion, and dysregulation. And as parents and educators, we want to control the environment by reducing noise and visual distractions as much as possible, but we can't control everything. I can't stop the smells from the lunch hall wafting up to the classroom. And I can't prevent another child calling out in a classroom that I'm not teaching in, or possibly even if I was teaching in that classroom. But I can control my word choice and how I speak. So by speaking slowly, clearly, and logically, I know I am doing my part to help the children I'm with feel regulated and supported. One final thought as we are talking about speech and choice of language. How do we refer to people? Do we say Jack is autistic or Jack has autism? This wasn't something I had given much thought to until I started my Master's of Education in Autism in 2019. I knew there was a conversation surrounding the use of person first, Jack has autism, versus identity first language, Jack is autistic, but I hadn't engaged with it. When I started studying and went to write my first assignment, my tutor told me that I had to declare in my introduction whether I'd be using person or identity first language and give a reason with evidence for my choice. I had assumed I would refer to both autistic people and people with autism because it seemed fair and it would add variety to my writing. And the advice was to use the language preferred by the person you were talking to, which wasn't very useful advice when writing a research paper. I decided to ask my son, who was 8 at the time, what he thought. He thought for a moment and said, "I'm autistic. You can't take it away from me, so it's not something I have." Well, that solved that. From then on, I have used identity first language to describe autistic people. Since then, I have read articles by and spoken to several autistic adults who feel the same way as my son. And the general consensus in the autistic community is to be referred to as autistic instead of having autism. However, as I was advised at university, use the language preferred by the person you're speaking to. But if you don't know their preference and it's not appropriate to ask, then err on the side of caution and go with autistic. Thank you for your time and interest in my recommendations for adapting your speech for autistic children. I'm sure you'll find that these suggestions are appropriate and applicable to speaking to all children and maybe even some adults. If you have any questions or would like to book me to speak at your school or organization, then please find me at www.homeschooluk.com.